Hannah would never forget the smell of the kitchen on Sunday mornings. Her father, Charles, would wake up before dawn to prepare pancakes with maple syrup. The sweet and comforting aroma filled every corner of the two-story house where they had lived for as long as she could remember. It was a sacred ritual between the two, even after her mother left. Her mother's memory was like a blurred photograph, which gradually lost clarity over the years. Hannah was only 9 years old when Elizabeth died from an aggressive illness. What remained were photographs in picture frames scattered around the house, the gentle fragrance that still lingered on some clothes stored at the back of the wardrobe. And Charles, a man who became both father and mother overnight. Charles was a tall man, with hands calloused from working in the carpenter's shop he kept at the back of the house. His face was marked by expression lines around his eyes, a result of the easy smile he insisted on maintaining, even on the toughest days. His dark hair was now sprinkled with grey strands, but his eyes held the brightness of someone who refused to let hope die. "A person without faith is like a compass without a north," he used to tell his daughter, on the nights they sat on the porch to watch the stars. This was another tradition between the two. On summer nights, they prepared hot chocolate even in the heat and stayed there, talking about life, about the future, about Hannah's dreams. Hannah grew up as her father's apple of the eye. While other girls complained of absent or authoritarian fathers, she had someone who attended every school performance, who patiently taught her math before exams, and who dried her tears when her first heartbreak happened at 15. At 19, Hannah was a young woman of simple and genuine beauty. She had wavy brown hair that fell halfway down her back, expressive eyes that seemed to change shade according to her mood, and soft freckles that dotted her nose and cheekbones. She dedicated herself completely to her studies after earning a scholarship at a local college to study veterinary medicine. Her house was on a quiet street in a peaceful residential neighborhood. Hannah loved that place but also dreamed of wider horizons, experiences that her small town could never offer. It was at a university party that spring night that she met Jason. He had an easy smile and a seductive manner, different from the boys in town. He came from a bigger place, studied business administration, and spoke with a confidence that attracted her. His brown eyes shone brightly, and his restless hands seemed to pull her into an unknown, but irresistible, dance. When Hannah introduced Jason to her father, Charles felt an indefinable discomfort. It wasn't something he could explain with words. There was something in the boy's gaze, something in the way he held his daughter's hand, something in the tone of voice he used when talking about the future, always vague, always grandiose. At Sunday dinners, while Hannah smiled delightedly at Jason's stories, Charles observed with a heavy heart, small signs that only a father's eyes could catch. One night, after Jason had left, Charles called his daughter for a conversation on the porch. The sky was particularly starry, reminding them of the nights of conversation when Hannah was just a girl. "Daughter, have you ever stopped to think if he is really the right person?" Charles asked carefully, avoiding a judgmental tone. Hannah sighed, looking at the stars. "Dad, he makes me feel things I've never felt before. It's different, special." Charles nodded, choosing his words carefully. "I just want you to remember that true love is not just about feeling, it's about building, about trust, about mutual respect." Hannah no longer saw her father's words as she once did. What he said now seemed outdated, distant from the world she wanted to know. The advice went in one ear and out the other, getting lost in the night wind as she thought only of Jason. Weeks turned into months and Hannah began to change. It started with small things, missed dinners, unanswered messages, a subtle distance growing like weeds in the garden that once flourished between father and daughter. Then, bigger things, arriving late at night, the smell of alcohol on her breath, unfocused eyes, laughter too loud to hide the emptiness beginning to form inside her. Charles stayed up, sitting in the armchair in the living room, waiting. The house had never felt so silent. He hoped that one day she would grow up, move on with her life. But not like this. On the longest nights, He would look at the photograph of Elizabeth, his deceased wife, on the coffee table and whisper, "Where did I go wrong? How I miss you here." It was on a rainy autumn afternoon that Hannah came home earlier than usual. Her clothes were soaked, but not as much as her eyes, red from crying. Charles was in the kitchen preparing a stew when he heard the door open. Seeing his daughter in that state, he dropped everything and ran to her. "Hannah, what happened?" It was as if those words had broken a dam. Hannah fell into her father's arms and cried like she hadn't since her mother's death. Between sobs, the words came out, painful, like sharp stones. She was pregnant. Jason wanted nothing to do with it. He said the child could be anyone's, that she was not trustworthy. But it wasn't true. He had been the only one, the first, the only one she trusted enough to give herself to. Charles listened in silence, his face paling, his gaze lost in emptiness. He felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Not just because Hannah was pregnant. That was just a consequence. But because someone she loved had hurt her so deeply, so irreparably. And he, who had sworn to protect her from all harm, could not prevent it. Silent tears ran down his time-worn face. And then, the words he never imagined saying escaped his lips. "My daughter, why did you do this? I didn't expect this from you." He went up to his room without looking back, each step feeling like a mountain. He sat on the edge of the bed, his trembling hands covering his face. He was disappointed with the choices she had made thus far, with the trust placed in someone who didn't deserve it. With the fact that his girl, so intelligent, so full of dreams, was now hurt in the worst possible way. Hannah, alone in the living room, felt the weight of those words like a leaden cloak on her shoulders. It wasn't just the baby growing inside her, it was the chasm now opening between her and the only person who had always been by her side. That night, while her father cried silently in his room, she made a decision. She would go to her Aunt Martha's house, her mother's sister, in a small town a few hours away. The next morning she left, leaving only a note. "I need time. I'm sorry for everything." Charles found the note and felt his world fall apart again. He wanted to run after her, to say it was okay, that they would find a solution together. But something held him back. Perhaps pride, perhaps fear, perhaps the feeling that she needed this space to find her own way back. The town where Martha lived was too small to hide secrets. Hannah soon realized that every trip to the supermarket was a parade of curious looks and poorly disguised whispers. "That's Martha's niece, got pregnant and the father didn't want to know." The 4 months she spent there were a daily exercise in endurance. Her belly grew, as did her loneliness. Aunt Martha was kind, but she wasn't her father. It wasn't the hug she had known forever. It weren't the hands that dried her tears. It wasn't the voice that calmed her on difficult days. When she completed her 5th month of pregnancy, Hannah decided to return home. She didn't know if she would be welcome, if her father still considered her his daughter, but she knew she had to try. The bus that took her back to her hometown seemed slower than ever, each kilometre increasing the anxiety that tightened her chest. Charles was in the workshop when he saw her arriving, a small suitcase in one hand, the other resting on her now visible belly. For a moment he was paralysed, as if seeing a ghost. Then he walked to her, not knowing what to say, not knowing how to act. The silence between them was dense, laden with everything that hadn't been said. "Can I stay?" she asked, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. "This will always be your home," he replied, taking the suitcase from her hands, avoiding looking directly at her belly. The days that followed were an awkward dance of two people who no longer knew how to approach each other. Hannah got a temporary job at a nearby convenience store, where the manager, a kind-hearted lady, didn't care about her condition. The pay was modest, but it was enough to buy small things for the baby. A pair of tiny shoes, some onesies, diapers, which she arranged at night when sleep wouldn't come. Charles watched from a distance, torn between the desire to help and the resentment he still felt. Not towards her, but because of the situation, because of everything that could have been different. Sometimes in the dead of night, he would enter the room that would become the baby's nursery and leave a gift, a stuffed teddy bear, a mobile with wooden stars, a small blanket he found at a bazaar. He never mentioned it, never said it was from him. But Hannah knew. Hannah found out it would be a little girl, tried to tell her father, but he only gave a slight smile, not showing any more reaction. He seemed frozen. The tension between the two reached a peak on a Saturday morning. Hannah had been up all night. It had been days since Charles barely spoke to her. Silence was his form of punishment, and perhaps that hurt more than any shout. She tried to help around the house, maintain some routine, but everything felt wrong, as if she had broken something inside him that could no longer be fixed. That morning, her father entered the kitchen and found her warming milk on the stove. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air. Hannah turned, unsure. "I made coffee, and there's bread and butter as well," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Charles ignored her. He took the car keys from the counter and made a move to leave. "Dad, wait, we need to talk. You can't keep treating me like I don't exist." She took a deep breath. "I know I disappointed you. But I'm trying. Really." He turned slowly, as if her words were a weight he didn't want to bear. "You think a bit of bread and coffee will erase everything. You made your choices. Now deal with them. Don't speak like that. I am your daughter." The response came without anger, without shouting, without emphasis, and for that very reason, it hurt even more. "I don't know. Sometimes it seems like you're not." Hannah felt as if she had been slapped. The tears came instantly, abundantly, painfully. She returned to her room without saying anything. What she couldn't see was Charles, on the other side of the door, falling to his knees, tears streaming uncontrollably. What she couldn't hear were his desperate prayers, asking for forgiveness, asking for guidance, asking for strength to do the right thing. The 7th month of pregnancy arrived with unusual heat for that time of year. Hannah was alone at home that afternoon, organizing the baby's few clothes, when she felt a liquid running down her legs. Confused, she initially thought she had urinated herself. But then the first contraction came, so intense that it made her double over her belly. "No, no, no. It's too early," she murmured to herself, panic rising. With trembling hands, she tried to call her father, who had no signal, and then managed to go out into the backyard to call for her neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, who had always been kind, even in the toughest times. "My water broke. My father isn't here. I need to go to the hospital," she managed to say between ragged breaths. Mrs. Martinez didn't have her car that day and called a rideshare while helping Hannah gather some basic belongings. As Hannah was on her way to the hospital, she tried calling Charles, but his phone was off. He was on an important delivery, far from town. The hospital was busy and Hannah was quickly taken to the obstetrics wing. The doctor who attended to her confirmed she was in premature labor. The baby would come, whether they wanted it or not. The delivery room was cold and impersonal. Nurses came and went, monitors beeped, technical voices discussed procedures. Hannah had never felt so alone in her life. The contractions came with increasing force, tearing screams from her that she tried to stifle by biting her own lip. The nurses asked her if she had any family with her, but she could only cry in pain, yet managed to say no. The nurses exchanged compassionate glances, feeling sorry for her being so young and alone during childbirth. One of them, older with grey hair and kind eyes, held her hand firmly. "We are here with you, dear. You are not alone." But she was. She felt terribly alone. She thought of her mother, who would never meet her grandchild. She thought of Jason, who had abandoned her at the moment she needed him most. She thought of her father, whose last words had been as painful as the contractions now consuming her body. In the delivery room, time seemed to move in slow motion. The white lights were dazzling. The sounds were a mix of screams, footsteps, and quick instructions. Hannah was sweaty, pale, clutching the sheets of the stretcher. The nurse held her hand, saying something she could barely understand. Everything hurt, and above all, it hurt to be alone. Hannah was at the peak of a contraction when the door opened. Through tears and pain she saw a familiar figure enter. She couldn't immediately see who it was. The oldest nurse approached, already prepared to intervene. "Sorry, sir, but we only allow the entry of—" His voice interrupted her, firm but choked. "I am here for her. Actually, for them. My daughter and my granddaughter." It was only then that Hannah understood. It was her father, Charles. Mrs. Martinez had managed to find him. He dropped everything and came without a second thought. He arrived at the hospital breathless, not even knowing what to do, but with one certainty: he needed to be there. The fear of not arriving in time made every step a silent prayer. And now, standing there, he was just a man trying to regain the chance to be a father and a grandfather. Hannah sobbed, a cry that came from the depths of her soul. It wasn't just the pain of childbirth, it was the relief, the hope reborn, the love that had never really left, only hidden under layers of hurt and misunderstanding. He approached slowly, extended his hand, and she, between one pain and another, held it. "Forgive me, daughter. Forgive me for not being here before. Forgive me for everything." There was no time for long conversations. The baby was coming. With her father by her side, whispering words of encouragement, Hannah found strength she didn't know she had. When she finally heard the fragile yet determined cry of her daughter, she knew that somehow everything would be all right. The tiny baby had to go to the neonatal ICU due to prematurity, but she was strong, a fighter from her first breath. Charles didn't leave the hospital for a single second. He slept in an uncomfortable chair, ate cold sandwiches from the cafeteria, but none of that mattered. He was exactly where he needed to be. There in that room, father and daughter reconciled. Not with words, but with gestures. He didn't leave her side. He held his daughter's hand, wiped her sweat, and cried softly as he watched his granddaughter being born. When he held the little girl in his arms for the first time, he truly cried. A cry of relief, of regret, of love. And he also smiled. That smile she hadn't seen in months. Hannah named her daughter Hope, because even in chaos, hope found a way to be born. Charles became the father she remembered, and became the grandfather she didn't even know she needed. He took care of them with the same love as before, perhaps even more. He forgave his daughter, because he understood that his love for her was more important at that moment. She didn't need judgments despite everything. She still needed care. And so, amid an unlikely setting, life found a new path. One day, Charles was in the room, arranging the stuffed animals in the crib when Hannah entered. She stopped at the door, hesitant. He didn't turn, but he knew it was her. "Dad, I'm sorry," she said in a low voice. "For everything, for hurting you." He turned slowly, his eyes moist. He said nothing. He just opened his arms. She approached, crying, and hugged him tightly. It was a hug that carried regret, pain, longing, and he welcomed her, as he always did. In the corner of the room, the handmade mobile swayed gently. They were details that said everything. He never stopped caring, never gave up on her. "The house is yours, daughter. It always was." She nodded, moved, looking at the crib with gratitude. There, Hannah understood that family is this, the place you return to, where there is forgiveness, new beginnings, and love that withstands time. Because the truth is that life rarely follows the script we plan. Love, that which comes from God, from family, from sincere repentance, is capable of healing, of starting anew, of transforming. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 5 to show how much you liked it. Also, watch the video that is now appearing on your screen. See you soon.